And
Because I think I am
yeah, you're supporting me. And it's not my intention, but it feels sometimes that I'm supporting Andrew. I mean, yes, I'm supporting Andrew, but I'm supporting the leadership more than just the whole fact trying to get us working this together as we go down the line. And I feel is able to work with all sides. No, absolutely not. And he will. Yeah, I was listening to him. I just felt like he insists that all sides are together on this.
You see that? Can you see it? Let's see. Where's my thing? There we go. Okay, there.
Yes, that's right. That's what I'm saying. If you get somebody, that would be either conservative or progressive, more progressive, we would definitely have no votes. I mean, we wouldn't be able to even bring them. I think, and that's what I feel.
Go.
The questions coming up are how should the leadership do that? And so this is the time for coffee between leadership. Okay. And then Sunday morning debriefing. And then have a Q&A after lunch. I'm not even sure I'm going to be there. Search committee. Well, he might, yeah, Daniel, probably. So, search committee is going to.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to all of you here in person, those of us joining via live stream, those of us watching a recording later on. Really delighted to have Karl McKinney with us this evening, and I will introduce him in a minute. But before we do that, Want to first of all welcome you all and thank you for coming out. It's good to know that the live stream is working, so we're very glad. And many, many thanks to Don Baumberger, who has been a real champ working with my inability to use technology. So let's stand and sing together number 390, In Christ There Is No East or West, number 390. And I should have had my pitch pipe ready to go. Sorry. In Christ there is no east or west. In him no south or north, but one great fellowship of love throughout the whole wide earth. In Christ shall true hearts everywhere their high communion find. His service is the golden cord, close binding humankind. Join hands then, people of the faith, whate'er your race may be. All children of the living God are surely kin to me. In Christ now meet both east and west. In him meet south and north. All Christly souls are joined as one throughout the whole wide earth. Thank you very much. Please have a seat. So we in VMR at Virginia Conference are very excited to welcome Karl. Karl McKinney is currently the Intercultural Leadership Minister for LMC, Family of Anabaptist Churches. He's also a church planter. He's a pastor and also previously pastored at Daniels Run Peace Church, where I'm now associate pastor, which is what led us to reconnect. And he's also a friend of our family since our days together in Pittsburgh at Pittsburgh Mennonite. We will have Karl present. There will be some interactive stuff, so please, if you need to come a little closer to see the screen, you're welcome to do that. After Karl presents for a little while, we will have a time for some questions, so please be prepared for that. I'll also note that we at Virginia Conference rely on donations from both individuals and churches to put on events like these and work towards our mission of equipping believers and churches for mission and service in the world. So if you're so inclined to donate, or you can donate online at virginiaconference.org/donate. You also can donate directly to our racial justice stuff if you're interested in that, and feel free to grab me afterwards as well. Without further ado, let's welcome Karl.
Okay, so you have your devices, right? You have your devices. The only way we can do this tonight is if we have a device. So, what you're going to do, the easiest way is go to your browser and type in menti.com, right? menti.com. And then you see the eight digits there once you get to the website. It'll ask you for those 8 digits, 8109-5007. So let me make sure it works, since I'm saying it does. And we'll get started. Okay. So you go there.
What is the code?
So it's 8109, right? 5007, and then hit join. Yep, there you go. You should be able to do that pretty easily. Okay. Are you in? You guys in? Okay. Okay, good. All right. Okay. So, I've been asked to help you work through the question of, if I take the IDI, what's next? And I'm gonna, at the end of this presentation, share a little bit about something that we do, that we're working at doing in LMC. There are over 400 leaders in LMC, credentialed, and about 129, now 130, have taken the IDI. And so I'm going to work you through this presentation. The way it's going to work is, you're going to be, in most of the slides, you're going to be asked some questions. So pay attention to your screen, keep your screen active as I move through the presentation, because you're going to have an opportunity to answer some questions. So some of this I can't really see. That's just about me. That's not really important. The first thing I'd like you to do on your screen is type your first name, hyphen your favorite food, and then hyphen your city of residence. This kind of gets you used to using the app. Okay. Can you type?
What was that code again?
Oh, it's right there on the screen at the top. What does it say? 81095007? 81095007. Okay. So how many of you successfully typed? Okay, good. Look, see, we're seeing, this is what you should expect. You're going to see your name, you're going to see your favorite food, you're going to see your city. Okay? So what's my name? Carl. Okay. What's my favorite food? Okay. And, okay. My city. There we go. So this is what you can expect. Not the same format, but when you enter your information in response to the questions, you'll see your information on the screen. And one thing I want you to be aware of, what you're typing, nobody knows unless they know your answers, right? Unless they've talked with you about it. There's a certain level of anonymity in participating in this, okay? All right, but after we're done with this, you're going to be able to get this presentation as a PDF. I'll send it to Caleb, and then Caleb will be able to send it to all of you guys if you want it. I'd like to do 4 things with you tonight. I want to introduce the Intercultural Development Inventory. Then we'll play a little bit of Jeopardy, and then I'll go right into some next steps you can take if you've taken the IDI, and then give you a description of what we're doing in LMC. And then, of course, you can ask some questions at that time. So we're going to start with you. So on your screen, you should see this question, and you're just going to answer this question. Have you ever completed an Intercultural Development Inventory, an IDI? If you have, you say yes. If you haven't, you say no. If you started it but you didn't finish it, you click that one. Okay? Okay. So am I reading it correct? How many of you who are not using a phone have not taken the IDI? Okay. All right. Okay. Well, let's keep going. For those of you who have taken the IDI, at the time you took it, was something happening that made it impossible or hard for you to focus and complete the IDI? So people have a lot of different experiences in life. Sometimes your racial justice task force asks you to take an IDI, and it's not a good time for a lot of different reasons. And so you may start it and not finish it, or you may start it and finish it and you get the results and you're not able to concentrate on it because of what's going on in life. So That happens to people too. How do we know if people who are online have or have not?
I saw a few folks online.
Okay, because I'm seeing
responded on the first slide, so.
Good, okay.
Yeah.
All right, good. So I'm not seeing a lot of activity. Okay, let's stay here. Have you ever completed an IDI and received a debrief? So in this question, you would know what a debrief is because Caleb may have contacted you and said, I want to talk to you about your profile. And if you don't know what that is, you basically say no, because you probably haven't received a debrief. Okay? Okay. Moving a little fast. Okay, so here is something called an Intercultural Development Continuum. Does this look familiar to you? Just raise your hand. Okay, good. All right, so the IDI is basically a device or a tool that helps us to relate how it is, or share how it is we relate to the cultural differences and cultural commonalities between ourselves and other people. And so using an algorithm, basically, they want to tap into your subconscious mind about how you think you relate to the cultural differences and cultural commonalities between you and other people. They also want you to report how you tend to behave and relate to those cultural differences and those cultural commonalities in some specific situations that they ask you questions about. So they ask you 50 questions and basically try to get you to share what's in your thinking about how you think you relate to cultural differences and commonalities. And they try to get you to share how you think you actually connect and relate to those differences and commonalities. So people, they rank themselves and they project the way they think they're connecting with differences and commonalities on this continuum. So you can see denial. There's a monocultural mindset on one end, beginning with denial, and there's an intercultural mindset on the other end, ending with adaptation. So it has to do with projecting how you think you relate to those differences from a monocultural perspective, right? You deny differences. Perhaps you deny that there are differences between us. And so you don't pay attention to those. You just may not actually see differences, right? All the way to I adapt. The fact of the matter is that between denial and adaptation, people tend to minimize the most. We tend to cluster around minimizing the differences between us and other people more than anything else along the continuum. That comes up. My computer keeps going to sleep, so I'm just waking it up. That's all. Sorry about that. That keeps coming up, comes up in all kinds of relationships that we actually have. We can minimize the differences from the day we actually get married, for example, or date someone. You might see somebody who's incredibly handsome to you or beautiful to you, and you're attracted to this woman or this man, and you see that, what you're attracted to. Maybe you guys don't know what I'm talking about. Maybe I'm just telling my own story. You see what you're attracted to, right? And overlook a lot of other things until you get married, right? Then you start to what? See more. You start to pay attention more. Maybe that's just been my experience. That's not been anybody else's experience. This is not unusual. It doesn't just happen in marriage, it happens when children come along. We project onto the children what we expect for the children, what we expect of the children, what we want from the children, not accepting them as the human beings that they are necessarily, but we have a dream for those children. And so we might miss the fact that they don't share that dream with you, right? We overlook those differences that they present to us because we're not looking for that. We're looking for something else. And so the reality of having to pay attention to how we think we relate to other people and the differences that they present is in front of us all the time, presenting itself as an opportunity. The question is, what are we doing as we encounter those differences? So the IDI is meant to help us. Oh, it keeps doing that. Okay, here we go. All right. The IDI is meant to help us. I'm going to ask you some questions in this Jeopardy section. You should see these on your phone now. And you will get to help illustrate a little bit of what we're talking about here. What is a way of living together on the land that other people can see with some parts that cannot be seen? Is it a culture? Is it cultural differences? Is it a dominant culture? So you select your one answer and submit it. Okay, so let's go back to my first illustration, which was marriage. Right? We're with the person that you were attracted to. And so you go out on a date with that person, and you can see some things right in your face, especially when you sit down, you start eating, you start talking, you're dialoguing, you're enjoying each other's company. And the more you talk just in that one meal, the more comes out that you can, oh, I didn't notice this before. Oh, this is different. And you start to see more than what you saw that was just on the surface. And that's a culture. That's what you're looking at. You're looking at, when we look at each other's way of presenting ourselves, the more we look, the more we realize there are things that we can see about a person, there are things that we can't see about a person. And that has to do with the culture that they come from and, of course, the differences between their culture and our culture. Here's your second question. What is the visible and unseen differences between two cultures in how their people live together on the land? And you can see the question on your screen. What is the visible and unseen differences between two cultures in how their people live together on the land? So you have three options there, right, on your screen? The underlying question of this, the concept of cultural differences, has to do with what do you see and what do you perceive? What do you see and what do you perceive? What do you discern in terms of differences? Are you perceiving or are you pushing, blocking, pushing away, preventing seeing? Sometimes we don't, our mindset leads us in terms of how we're going to respond to the cultural differences that are right there, and the cultural differences that are not necessarily easy to perceive. So the work, for example, in communication with each other, the work of understanding what are the needs two people are expressing when they have a conflict between them, the work in a conflict between people from two different cultural perspectives is extra difficult because you have to want to know what is the need this person is expressing to me, and how do I communicate the need I have to this person who's different from me? It's work. It's easy to see some cultural differences. It's hard to see other cultural differences. It takes work. And so what we're talking about here is cultural differences. And I'm suggesting in this that the challenge after taking the IDI is to understand what your own cultural differences are, particularly for those of us who minimize differences, right? We're minimizing. We just want to get along. We don't have a need to understand the cultural differences of the other. We just want people to behave the way we would like them to behave, or we don't really care. We don't really need to know why this person is so different from us, because that's not something that is of a particular concern to us. The work, though, if you want to connect with people who are culturally different, requires you to perceive, and then to want to know, and then to lean in and to engage in order to see the differences and why they're there and how they're so different from who I am. Let's go to the next question. What is similarities between two different cultures that can be visible and that can be unseen? Similarities between two different cultures that can be visible and that can be unseen. What's the key word there? Similarities between two different cultures that can be visible and that can be unseen. What is the cultural group with power and control of the values and the practices of the group, organization, society, or nation? Doesn't matter. What is the cultural group with power and control of the values and the practices of the group, organization, society, or nation? Okay. Okay, and what is the cultural group with almost no power and no control over the values and the practices of the group, organization, society, or nation? Okay. All right, so I go through some of these Jeopardy type questions because of the reality that a lot of times in my experience, people go through the IDI and miss some of the most basic information. That's because that's the way surveys are. We start surveys or profiles with a level of suspicion, a level of distrust. I think that's good, right? There's some health to that. When I first took the IDI, I'll tell you a little bit background about me. I grew up pretty much multicultural all my life. When I was about 9 years old, so that would have been 1970, 71, parents moved from Inglewood in Chicago on the far south side, which is an all African American black community. Moved us into further south on the south side into a neighborhood called West Pullman, named after the historic Pullman rail company. And when we moved in, the community was very mixing. It was definitely mixing, changing, for a lot of different factors that are endemic to large cities that I won't go through here. By the time I graduated from high school, in another part of Chicago, I had lived in a multicultural world most of my life at that point. And from then on, basically multicultural. So when I first took the IDI, I took it with a lot of confidence that, I'm the kind of person who accepts and adapts to differences. That just was my mindset. Like, nothing was further from the truth, because what was happening for me is what happens for a lot of us. We need resources to help us reflect on what we're actually doing in relationships with people who are culturally different from us. Like I said, whether that's a girlfriend or whether that's your children, you need help to illuminate the way you think you relate to people and the way you actually relate to people. And so the IDI is a helpful resource, and yet I find that for most of us, we have similar experiences, particularly if we've served in ministry or mission. Like if we've served in ministry or mission, we've invested ourselves, we've given ourselves, we relate to a lot of difference constantly. People coming from all kinds of different perspectives, from different lifestyles than what we live. Difference is baked in to what it means to be in ministry. A lot of times people think that the IDI is all about just dealing with race or just dealing with sexuality in particular, from where I come from. But difference knows no bounds. Difference is not restricted to the things that we tend to be focusing on. You'll notice that in the Jeopardy questions, one of the questions had to do, what's the dominant culture and what's the non-dominant culture? Where the major construct in the world is male-female. Who's dominant and who's non-dominant? Okay? So if you're not paying attention to that, you may be missing probably the greatest difference that we actually still struggle with in so many different ways. But if you start paying attention to how difference is all around you, then you will begin to be able to notice how you actually relate. Think about those differences when you're sitting in a room with two men and two women trying to do anything. I don't care what it is. I'm reading At the Dark End of the Street by a historian who talks about the pivotal role that women played in starting the Montgomery Improvement Association in Montgomery, Alabama. But when you read history books, you won't see much of that story really played out in any detail whatsoever. You would think that the guys in the story were the ones who did everything. really getting to the facts of what actually happened, that were the Montgomery Improvement Association was, before it was ever named, was envisioned by women who were tired of the experience of women being assaulted on the buses of Montgomery, Alabama, by bus drivers and police officers. Fundamental to understanding the civil rights movement in the modern era is understanding the role of women. But difference is so powerful in every culture, in every cultural group, that sometimes we push down the true histories. And that in and of itself is an act of not appreciating the way we relate to differences. So this is important. The IDI is not a Christian tool. It's not a tool of people who are anti-racist particularly. It's not a tool of anti-oppression particularly. It's particularly a tool for individuals who are wanting to learn how they relate to the differences between themselves and other people, and the commonalities between themselves and other people. That's what it is. So I threw my first IDI results in the trash because obviously it didn't know me. It didn't understand how I'd grown up and how I'd lived my life and, what I was doing at that moment when I took the IDI. My whole life is multicultural. But I didn't understand that, first of all, I'm reporting on myself. Second of all, the tool is basically reflecting, in other words, the way I think and the way I would tend to respond in some tightly narrated circumstances from which they try to help me see, hey, this is how you're relating to cultural differences and cultural commonalities. All right, so as we go into this next part, my point for you has to do with the importance of wanting to know, as an individual, how do I relate to cultural differences and commonalities? Purely and simply. Yeah, you've been a minister for a while. Yeah, you've done whatever you've done. Yeah, you're on the non-dominant side of the relationships in a dominant, where someone else is dominant. Yeah, you're on the dominant side in a situation where someone else is non-dominant. The critical issue is you wanting to know, how do I relate to the differences and commonalities between me and other people? So I start here. Are you interested in retaking or taking the IDI? And I start with retaking because maybe like me, you threw your profile in the trash. Or like a leader with a doctor in psychology said to me the other day, I look at these tools with great deal of skepticism. He hadn't thrown it in the trash, at least like I did. I said that, I look at this tool with great deal of skepticism, and I threw it in the trash. But then the next thing out of his mouth was, well, it's not a Christian tool. And one of the things about the IDI, of course, is it's not a Christian tool. It's not trying to promote a religious perspective, a nationalist perspective, any perspective. That's not what it's doing. It's trying to help you as an individual explore the way you relate to cultural differences and commonalities. This might be the starting point for you, is to say, okay, I'm going to lean into this a little bit more. I'm going to redo this and take myself seriously and think about it. When I retook my IDI, it was because I took the results that I had thrown in the trash so seriously. I started sitting around the table with my sweetheart and listening to the way I was responding to her. after all those years of marriage. You know, we make a lot of, I'm going to say we make, because I don't want to say I make, a lot of mistakes just not paying attention to the way I listen, and to the way I hear, and to the way I respond. So when I got it out of, well, it wasn't, the hard copy was in the trash. But Jesus had sent me an electronic copy, so I could recover it. So I looked back at it, and of course, you know, I was that profile was just bugging me so much. And it was the beginning of tapping into ways of repressing, ways of getting things that made me anxious, things that made me defensive, things I hadn't even been paying attention to. I just, when anxiety would rise, I would just react, like to try to, right? Or when fears would arise, I would just react. Or defense strategies of denying, minimizing, whatever they were, I would just react to shut them off and move on to the next thing. Maybe some of that has happened for you. Maybe you do need to lean in and retake the IDI. You can contact Caleb about that. After your debrief, here's the second thing you can do. Some people take the IDI. They may participate in something called a group debrief, or they may actually have somebody spend an hour and a half or 2 hours with them going over the 9-page document, okay? Once you have that debrief, either one, the next step really is to work through a 4-section individual intercultural development plan. So the question is, did you do that? And that's your choice. If you got to the point where you took the profile on 9 pages and threw it in the trash because you said it didn't know me, then you probably didn't work on an intercultural development plan. The intercultural development plan has value for you if you're leaning in. So if you did complete one, you might want to go back to that. If you didn't complete one, I would suggest taking the IDI over again, getting a debrief, and then planning in your mind, I'm going to answer these questions in this very long 18-page document. and let it help me dig into how I relate to the cultural differences between myself and other people. If you did your IDI, I want you to share, if you'd like to share, at least one objective you've been pursuing since you completed it. And this, I'll give you a few seconds 30 seconds to do this. Just one thing you're working on. There's some actions going on. Next part. All right. Okay, yeah, so that's good. Okay. So since you completed your IDP, if you did that, describe one objective you've been working on. That means you got through all 4 sections of the IDP and you finished it. And so you didn't just do the IDI. and have a debrief and not do an IDP, but you did an IDP. I mean, it's a long, it asks you a lot of good questions. So if you work through that, what's an objective that you're working on since you did your intercultural development plan? And maybe some of your answers are from, you've already answered them in the previous slide, I don't know. So I had a fight with my wife. We don't fist fight. We don't throw things or anything like that. Our oldest daughter and two of her two children, they live with us. And so 2 Sundays, last Sunday. No, 2 Sundays ago. Whenever it was really recent. And it was a Sunday. I made oatmeal. I love oatmeal. And so I made a big pot. And, I don't tell them when to eat. Their mother tells them when to eat. I'm just feeding them. So they didn't want the oatmeal. So they ate tricks. Okay. So grandmother, my wife, Mimi, finds out they just ate tricks. And it's time to go to worship. And she knows how they behave when they've had more sugar and no protein. So she says, you're going to stand here in this kitchen. Well, first, go on the porch and put your shoes on. They go on the porch, put their shoes on. They come back in, and I can hear her. I'm upstairs. I can hear her. And she's saying, you're going to stand here in this kitchen and eat 4 spoons of oatmeal each. I'm not taking you to church until you've had some oatmeal, because every time we go to church, and she's getting redder, and she's white. She's getting redder and redder. The more she talks to him. Every time we take you to church and you haven't eaten enough, you want to go back into the kitchen and get food. We don't go to church to get, and she's getting redder and redder. We don't go to church. And then I come in and I say, okay, that's fine. Eat it out on the porch, because I don't want you walking through the house with your shoes on. And she turns to me and she lays into me, like, powerfully. I won't tell you what she said, because this story is about me, what I did. Mostly. And so she goes on and on and on and on and on with what she said that I'm not going to tell you. And everybody's hearing it, and I turn away from her, and I wash my coffee cup in the sink, and I turned and looked at her, and I said, okay, Kelly, let's go to worship. Because they've eaten 8 spoons of oatmeal by that time. They're fascinated with Mimi and Papa fighting. All right, so we both have to drive separately, because when worship is over, I have to go in one direction, and she has to go in another. I'm driving to the worship, and I just felt so clear. I need to talk to her and find out what made her so upset before I can sing. Like, I can't go sing to God. When I'm having anxiety attack. I'm upset. Okay, frankly, because I don't know where that came from. So I get to worship, and she's in the back, and I say, let's talk. And so we go outside and we're talking. I said, I don't know, what that was all about. And then I repeated what she said that I did and apologized for it. I said, but I'm sorry that happened. And I'm sorry that I did that. I hope you'll forgive me, because I wasn't trying to, I was just trying to keep my floor clean. I clean the kitchen. I empty the dishwasher. I fill the dishwasher. I mop the floor. The kitchen is that's my place. Okay? It's my job. And so I'm very picky about it. I go sit down, and that's when I find out it's Communion Sunday, which was hilarious. It's like, I didn't even know. I'm not the pastor there, I'm not responsible for all that. So, and I tell that story just related to the whole reality of, okay, in the past I would have just just try to ignore it and go on, there's something about getting older together that we tend to absorb more and like we don't treat each other with that carefulness and really lean in. Okay, what's going on? Because I can see as we get older, things hurt and hit us harder than sometimes we acknowledge. We're in a different phase now, and so we have to be really careful not to ignore. So the IDP type work, the stuff of noticing what's going on inside of you and how you're relating to differences, is important work. So I want to talk to you for a minute about the value. I've just encouraged you to take your IDI again. I've just encouraged you to get a debrief this time and then work on your IDP. Those are some next steps, just depending on, I don't know what that is, just depending on what is that? Notes quit. That's okay. I don't need notes. Okay. Just depending on where you are, okay? You may need to do that. But even so, the Intercultural Development Plan has deeper value. It helps us to name activities we're going to do. Learning happens more deeply when we reflect on and discuss with others. The Intercultural Development Plan actually helps you to plan some activities that will end up connecting you, depending on where you are in the continuum, connect you with people who are different from yourself. Connect you, if you're in minimization, with your own story. So digging in and knowing your own story, better than, I know that my family immigrated here, if you're white and they settled this land here and they've been farming here for 200 years. That's not really your whole story. And so digging in and knowing your story is critically important. If you're in minimization and you really don't care about the cultural differences between you and other people, that not caring has to be encountered. It has to be addressed. It has to be engaged more than you think. And so the IDP helps you to dig into where you are on that continuum and to move forward in terms of some learning opportunities. So here's an invitation. A couple of people, maybe you want to talk a little bit about something that happened to you as you dug into your IDP. Does anybody want an opportunity to share?
I can take the microphone.
Sure. Yeah. The other part of the IDP, while you think about this, another part of the IDP that I want to share that it does for you is it actually invites you to increase the amount of time that you are actually learning in the course of a week, not necessarily in adding more books, documentaries, or adding more work. Most of the learning has to do with what you're doing in the context of relationships you already have. So you have a job, you have a family, you have school, you have volunteer opportunities, you have neighbors all around you. So the question is, in those contacts and in those relationships that you have, if you go to the gym, whatever you're doing, how are you engaging the differences between you and the people all around you? Even in segregation, which is the way we live, there's more difference around us than we often acknowledge, right? So the more you lean into your IDP and increase the amount of time that you're paying attention to how you're engaging differences, the more you're going to move along that continuum between denial and adaptation. So does anybody want to share anything out of your experience? working on your IDP?
I'll share one piece that stood out to me the first time I did the IDI and the IDP was to kind of just, I'm a big reader in it kind of, there was a question that asked, are you reading books from folks outside your own culture?
Right.
And I realized much less than I expected, actually. Out of 10 books, at least 9/10 of them were written by straight white men. And that was just, I could never have said that off the top of my head before. So even that has kind of pushed me to diversify how I'm engaging with the thought of serious thinkers in the way of books. And so that's been a real joy for me now over the past few years to try and change that.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
I think for me, it's been mostly the reading of memoirs.
Memoirs of other people?
To read a wide variety of memoirs from very different points of view to help not only hear people's different experiences, but how they explain how they came to have those differences. Because many memoirs at least touch on people's childhood and how they dealt with it as adults, how they adapted their lives or how they came to face difficult things. So that for me has been a very helpful way of understanding differences between people.
Right.
In their own words.
Right. Right.
Well, my wife and I have been doing some traveling. She retired in June, and we got to visit Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, Tennessee, and tried to, the towns that we would go through, we would look for either museums or go to the visitor center and see if we could find out some history, local history of racial, how things were. Also, occasionally we will go to state parks, and it's interesting when we went to one state park here in Virginia, which had a house there that you could tour. The guide really downplayed slavery. I mean, it was it was there, but it was okay. I mean, but the national parks, there are excellent exhibits and things like that I think tell the true story, give a more accurate picture of what life was like.
Okay. For the sake of time, I want you be able to see this description of intercultural competence, but the activity that you're engaging in when you work through the IDI and what you're aiming to achieve is to work more and more towards accepting the cultural differences and adapting to building adaptation between you and people who are culturally different. So if you put that in the context of a marriage, you're working at building adaptation. In other words, I don't want to be married and everything is determined and governed by the wishes of one of us, right? Overpowering the other one, right? What we really want is we want to build adaptation. And I look at this from a biblical perspective of Jesus, God drawing all these people to Jesus, and then Jesus turning to them and saying, here's what I want you to do. Like turning to each one individually and saying, I want you to love that one the way I love you. Because that's in fact what he said. So adaptation would be me taking my orders from Jesus in terms of the way I relate to the other person. It makes it extremely personal and extremely structural all at the same time. I don't know how God does that, but that's the way God works, right? It's extremely personal and it's extremely structural. The challenge always is the reference point for me is Christ. That's the reference point. And how I relate to the other person. Now, I could come up with all kinds of excuses why I don't want to do that, but that's another story. The issue is, am I learning to accept the differences between me and other people, or am I not? Am I learning to adapt to the cultural differences between me and other people, or am I not? Let me go back here, sorry. Okay. Because this reality of being stuck in a monocultural mindset will not change unless we actually work towards it. And so the things that I've actually recommended so far are pretty important for us being able to move towards acceptance and adaptation and an intercultural way of living together. IDI focuses upon accepting and adapting to differences and commonalities. And what I've invited you to do in here, you may want to do this, I don't know, you may not want to, is to describe the cultural differences between the people in your own household or family, which I always find this to be a really good exercise. So one of the differences, for example, between me and the people in my family now, I never expected our grandchildren to live with us, is that I love quiet in the evening, in particular. So that's a difference between us, because I think it's never evening in the mindset of a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old. So think about that. Reflect on the differences and commonalities in your household, just in your home. This is the ground. This is where most of the action happens, most of the time for most of us. Can be so determinative of how we function in the rest of the world outside, how we relate to the differences between us and people in our own home. Most of us as ministers and servants in any way, when we look back on our lives, we often wish that we had related to the people closest to us much better, I'll say, right? And much of that has to do with acceptance and adaptation. It really does. So, describe the cultural differences between the people in your church and neighborhood. Now, this is not something you need to do now, but this is something you need to do. This is a challenge, right? This is a relational challenge for us. How do we relate to those cultural differences between us and people in our congregations and in our neighborhood? How do we relate to the cultural differences between the people where you serve or work? Because not just churches, but where you serve or where you work. Accepting and adapting to those differences and commonalities. And again, I provide a definition of intercultural competence for us to really grapple with. The work of bridging the differences and changing our attitudes and our mindsets is lifelong work. It truly is lifelong work. And if we can work on it, we can actually improve the way we're relating to the differences between us and other people. But I alluded to this earlier, and this has more to do with the concern we have as followers of Christ. There are so many resources available to us as followers of Christ, particularly in the Spirit of the Lord, for relating to the differences and the commonalities between us. I think that the way I started was the issue of the IDI not really knowing me, and not throwing it in the trash, that type of thing, has more to do with the fact that we don't see how to bridge our inabilities in relating to people's differences with us. We don't seem to know how to bridge those differences, and it's almost like a feeling of not knowing something at a time. If you're older, not knowing something at a time in your life when you feel like you should know how to do this. This shouldn't be so hard. And frankly, making it a priority to ask God to teach us what we're doing, not just to get past what we're actually doing, but to show us, how am I relating? How am I thinking of these people? And how am I relating to the differences between us? And how can I do better? How can I improve in the way I'm relating to the differences and commonalities between us? And what resources really do I have for doing a better job at this? It's a much more honest approach to where we are. It's not a game. It's not a competition. It has to do with real, genuine relationships between us and other people. So I give that as an assignment. And I don't really have a whole lot of time to go into this right now, but if you're at the seminary on Tuesday, you'll hear me talk about this a little bit more. So I should stop.
Let's give Karl a round of applause here. And Karl will be doing seminary chapel, which is at 11 a.m. on Tuesday. But we can take a few minutes for question and discussion yet. Okay. So I see Harvey has a question.
Okay.
I've been thinking about the implications of what you've been saying regarding relationships in the church and between churches. We have a number of congregations that are considering disaffiliating with Virginia Mennonite Conference. And interestingly, I think perhaps affiliating with LMC. It just seems like we're seeing constant examples of people who are choosing between being, I've been reading Civil War history, between being unionists or secessionists. And so often in our Mennonite communities, we have chosen the secession route and simply formed a separate kind of communion or community. Just wondered if you had some comments about that.
I can tell my personal story. I'm surprised when people come. At LMC, we have these newly credentialed leaders orientations. So I'm not at the part of governance where I go out and talk to the different conferences of MCUSA that are talking with our bishops about joining LMC. But at the newly credentialed leaders orientations, I'm there. And so they're surprised when I open my mouth and talk about Intercultural Leadership Ministry, because I'm saying to them, hey, you need to learn how to relate and accept the differences between you and other people. And so if you've come that far where you're thinking about leaving the people you're with because the grass is greener in LMC, well, we're talking about this issue as well. We're dealing with this stuff too. And I think that's challenging for some folks thinking of leaving MCUSA. And I do it from a perspective personally where I never disaffiliated from MCUSA. My whole view was, no, I don't think we should be leaving MCUSA. Geographically, we're still around all the churches that were part of MCUSA and these other conferences. There's got to be more resources available to us than we're actually accessing. That's how I feel. And I don't think that constantly choosing to secede is the answer. I just don't believe that. And so I don't always know the answer to the conundrums and the challenging questions that we're facing. But I do believe God is the one who's drawing people to Jesus. Fundamentally, I don't have any control over that. I'm hopeful that he's drawing all the people I don't like as much as he's drawing the people that I do like. That's how I feel about it. It's not mine to control. And so we do have these kind of iron sharpening iron conversations in LMC, because I'm not going to stop saying those kinds of things. And people, God keeps drawing people to Jesus. And I'm grateful for that. So that's some of what I think. Yeah.
Other questions, comments? Would you share about what is the racial diversity of LMC like at the moment? And on top of that, have there been some difficult conversations between churches of different cultures?
Sure. So LMC is facing that same statistical demographic shift that the nation's facing. We have like somewhere around 48% white and then everything else. In terms of, we used to collect those statistics much more regularly and be, processing them than we have in the last couple of years. So that's the last numbers or information that I know. We have about 14 or 15 language groups from that information 2 years ago. Our fastest growing sectors are Spanish speaking. So the Shalom Council got the largest body of congregations as a district. Garifuna would be next. Spanish-speaking Black, Spanish-speaking people. But they're both segregated and equally segregated from the white part of LMC. In terms of controlling what they actually do, they really don't partner in terms of that type of thing. So it's a divided, segregated reality that shapes LMC as much as any other denomination, as far as I can describe, as well as I can describe it. And what was the second part of your question?
Would there be examples of where cultural difference was, something that you helped navigate, or how has that played out in LMC?
Yeah, so that is a conversation that's hard for LMC to have, right? How do we navigate cultural differences? I think that's the fairest way to say it. And so when we before we started the Intercultural Leadership Ministry, the Conference Executive Council under Keith Weaver's leadership pulled together a bunch of African American Black leaders because George Floyd had been killed. We made some recommendations for this conversation to be able to happen in a structured, systemic way instead of happening out amongst the people, but not being something that the governance was actually facilitating. And so the governance made it possible for us to have the conversation, but sometimes you marry a person and you realize, I don't know that I should have done that, and that's been part of the challenge, because the conversation you need some skills in order to really have the conversation, and that's part of what Intercultural Leadership Ministry is all about. And I think to some extent we've actually been able to demonstrate the reality that we do need to be learning together how to have these conversations. Twin Win and I are working on a couple things, like having Bible study for bishops who are scared, how their districts might respond to this type of difficult conversation. We start that on Tuesday, as a matter of fact. We have a cohort starting on Tuesday. We have other learning circles within the denomination that are based in the districts or based in organizations. And in those settings, people are processing their cultural differences in their organization or in their district and finding differences that they didn't actually realize were as prominent as they actually are. That doesn't mean that they're navigating them smoothly or easily. There are no Asian communities participating. No all black groups are participating. No Spanish-speaking groups are participating, and very few all white groups are participating. So the conversation is very challenging.
Yeah, thank you. That was a vulnerable question to ask. So, good answer. One final question or comment from the audience.
I appreciate you reflecting, sort of measuring individual and structural and group change. I think of groups that I've been a part of that sort of wrestle with individual reflections on intercultural competency and how do we as a group wrestle with that. And I think of like a 6-lane highway. Sometimes we just stay in our lane and we just cruise. And we're all going the same direction, but I'm in my lane, this person's in their lane. In terms of yourself and in terms of groups you've been a part of, whether LMC, MCUSA, other denominations, how have you seen tipping points occur for organizations where it's probably not good to be merging back and forth across 6 lanes all the time, but where do we find ways to abide together? You named, I think, like almost 1/3 of the leaders in LMC have worked with the IDI. Like, that's a substantial number. What are other patterns or postures that lead us to getting out of our lanes and just going 80 miles an hour in our own lanes?
So for LMC, I'll start with, for LMC, trying to find another way to avoid having terminology and constructs like oppression, race, gender, right? Don't want to have those don't want to do learning around those concepts. Trying to find other ways to have a conversation that are biblically based while avoiding sort of the colorblind version 2, right? Let's get away from the real conversation and let's figure. And so avoidance is huge. It's huge for a lot of denominations, though. It's not just LMC. I'm just making that point. Okay. And so where we actually do the work is when we commit to being in groups where we also learn how to hear one another's stories and use some skills that we may not actually have, but learn some skills in hearing one another without judging one another, or trying to change one another, or trying to correct one another, or trying to embellish what one another says. The experiences that I've had that are effective along those lines, it takes time to learn those disciplines through trial and error. They just do. And I'm not sure that without the individual commitment, right, to learning how I do relate to cultural differences and to being willing to learn to relate to cultural differences and commonalities, though that our group has had members over the last 4 years who, I'm saying the group that I'm part of that's not in LMC, who self-select themselves out because they encounter stuff about themselves that they're not really sure how to deal with or don't want to address. And skills that it takes patience to hear someone say something you don't want to hear and to not jump in and try to change them. And be committed that at the same time, well, we're all followers of Jesus. The second group that I'm part of is growing, actually, because the 2 pastors leading the church, they're committed to this way of being together. And so you end up with people attracted to Jesus, but actually coming in their raw humanity and feeling welcomed enough to be raw, like who they really are, in ways that are offensive to you if you've been enculturated to church, right? Making those types of spaces, and those are 2 spaces that are successful, but it takes the followers of Christ having the willingness to make those types of spaces. Yeah.
Irvin had a question.
Okay.
I'll let him go here.
I'm so appreciative, Karl, for your reflections here. I think what you're expressing for LMC would be largely true of many places across MCUSA and
Right.
Virginia Conference.
Right.
Well, wherever humans live. I think.
Wherever we are.
But I appreciate your emphasizing that this is not it wasn't built on a Christian base necessarily, but you're wanting to adapt the principles that align with our Christian faith,
Right.
which has to do with how we love one another.
Right.
Basically. I think here's the hard question I think that I see makes it difficult for people to do the IDI. That there is a moral element to this. That as I understand the IDI, the further you move toward intercultural competence, the better it is. It's a moral judgment that we learn to adapt to other people. So how does that square with a country that wants very much for certain cultures to win the moral war on issues? So you're encountering something that says you cannot, you must stand and fight for your, this is true of progressives and conservatives both, you have to stand and fight for this when the IDI says you need to adapt to this. How do you deal with that difference in your work? You know, how do you do what is right?
Right. So for me, as a church planter, right, like I think of church as all about we're witnessing to someone's incarnation. That's what we're doing. So to me, IDI actually facilitates me as an individual thinking with other individuals about how I'm actually living out my faith with them, because I can't witness without them. So if I'm not actually authentically accepting and adapting with them, then what am I doing? What is the nature of witness? And I think it's interesting to me as a church planner who studied this stuff in seminary that we actually subconsciously choose methodologies consistent, like I remember the evangelism idea of one-to-one evangelism, in other words, cultural similarity or cultural difference. We baptize that as good. That the more similar to you other cultures were, the easier it would be to make disciples. We weren't thinking about us doing witness together. We were thinking about basing our witness on a platform of racism. Racially consistent with our racial constructs, living in consistency with concepts of oppression. So to me, this question goes more to the heart of witness, right? So that's the way I think about it. And I think our witness to our neighbors who are wrestling over the material things, right? Is God delighting over one nation surviving at the expense of other nations? No, I don't think so. God's delight is in justice. And God delights in justice, and God delights in mercy, and God delights in compassion. God delights in righteousness and truth. That's what the scriptures say. God's not delighting in a nation that is trying to figure out how to survive at the expense of everybody else. There's a hint and an explicit message of judgment upon a nation that lives like that. And it's difficult for some of us to say that, but the reality is we witness in a context where God's watching what we do. And so that's the way I think about it. I think our witness is at stake, right? Just like our personal souls are at stake. If we don't put this front and center in terms of the way we're living in the world, I don't think it's smart to think that the heavens and the earth that God is willing to roll up and discard, according to Hebrews chapter 1, because God loves justice and equity, which will endure, according to Hebrews 1, I don't think it's important for us to be putting the things that can't remain ahead of the things that can remain. That's what I think. And so I think straining and struggling over the way I relate to other people is front and center. Like, it's got to be front and center. That's the way I think. So, yeah.
Wonderful. Thanks.
Okay.
Let's give Karl another round of applause. And I will just briefly close us in a word of prayer. God of grace and power, thank you for this evening of learning and seeking after you, our God of justice, God of all peoples. Guide our paths as we go from this place. Lead us to see you reflected in people different than us. All God's people said, amen. Go in peace.